You're saying is,
So that part was good.
Kyle,
Both lucky or something.
Yeah, we're actually audience members.
Yeah.
how got you in the members present?
Pretty good.
I should have done it, sorry.
It was a while, I have to say, we did 5 in 3 days.
Through the S curves.
So,
Last night she got to
I
jam.
got coming up
Yeah,
to
and,
my jam. Someone passed me.
I like
and
honey
she
lemon
went
cream.
by a 100. By the time I got to our house, they were out.
what was interesting was,
I got passed yesterday on Lower Street,
we
right
were
in
almost
front
the
of
only
the
ones.
road,
Yeah.
and in front of me.
Like,
Getting
the UVM tour was very big. The American, UMO, Norway.
Thank
Yeah.
goodness the
It's pretty much, it looks like we needed their parents.
So I was on the street.
This first one.
My favorite tour.
you. You really got an
This is my mother, there was a mother, it was a big group.
And so I was like,
Or maybe,
slowly
or
making
something
my
like
way
that.
out.
And this mom is like, we're in a dorm, and this mom is with her kid, I think she has twins. And she's like, so, they provide like accessibility is good there either, like rooms, and the kids mortified, walked out of the room. The kid who was giving the tour was like,
Missing driveway.
I don't know.
So bad. I literally drove by my driveway and I like a fashionable house.
It's like,
And I was like, wait, and you know the time? You couldn't even see it.
So you have your stuff from last
That was
week.
surprisingly bad.
Looking forward to the big update.
What's that?
Looking forward to the big update.
I hope people have their,
This is awkward for my job to be that.
it's not a miracle.
Great. Now you like it like that?
It's like, no, I'm
Still
good to go. Still good.
What crowd? I really do that. Anytime. Anytime.
He died.
Well, it looks like it is 6 o'clock and we appear to have a full complement of board members. So I'd like to call to order the 14th regular meeting of the Board of Directors of SAD 52. And if Jessica could lead us in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. So our first order of business for this evening is our budget work session. And that would be item 2. 2.1 is our work session. And I think, Carrie and Gabby, did you want to update folks at this point? I know there was some indication that there were some numbers that look a little bit different based on some state adjustments.
So you have updated budget documents, pretty much everything except for debt service.
Other expenditures and reserve accounts, those remain the same. Everything else you have updated documents for, and they are green.
Not quite hornet green, but green. That was the theme, just so you appreciate we chose green for a reason. We're hoping. It's also money. It's money, oh, see, so many reasons. There we go. So, very first thing, and the first thing I give you is the ED 279. So I put the quote from the Department of Education because this stuff is beautiful. You just should read it out loud. So this was the message that was in the email. Was it Tuesday, 4:30?
I think it was closer to 5:30.
5:30, but we were in our negotiations prep meeting, which is why I didn't know about it until the next day. So they found a duplicative, I've practiced that word, duplicative data entry in the algorithm that generates the funding estimates in the reports. The duplicative data entry inaccurately inflated the mill rate in the preliminary reports. That is what they told us. So what I have for you is a revised ED 279 that I'm just going to talk through real quick. So, first, nothing changes. Things that are green and red have been green and red the whole time. So good things are they up the amount they're giving per pupil. That doesn't change. We still have our reduction in disadvantaged students for free because of free and reduced lunch. Like none of that has changed. So the changes are on the 4th page in blue. So the valuation has stayed the same, but the mill rate was cut from 7.29 to 6.97 for the required local contribution. So that means that the required local contribution that has been $709,872 this entire time is now reduced. The increase of the required local contribution is now down to $339,194. So it's still an increase, but it's a pretty significantly smaller increase, not quite half, but okay. So that's the first big change, and then the next change has to do with subsidy. So the shift from state funding to local funding had been a 2.12% shift. That shift is now 0.62, so it's still a shift. Local funding is still a higher side than the subsidy, but it is lower than it was. And our subsidy was decreased by $127,596. Now it is increased by $365,760. Yay.
Yeah.
Okay, so we wanted to make sure that we talked through that and you had that update. We also have made some other changes within the budget, some of this related to just internal work, right? So there was a reduction in nurse salary benefits. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but we've had a notification of a retirement, so we've adjusted that in relation to that. I provided you all with an update to health insurance. The entire time we've been talking about our budget, we have budgeted an increase of health insurance by 10%. All the guidance we were getting was that this was going to be like 10% was the safest number, and that's typically what's done anyway, but we anticipated that it's going to stay close to 10%. We've now gotten word that the highest possible percentage increase that will be is 6%. So we won't get our final number until, unfortunately, April 7th.
If we're lucky.
Okay? So we've reduced that to the 6% increase, which was a reduction of $147,780. So worst case scenario, that's the increase. After last meeting, we reduced the diesel fuel because of our bid came in below what we had budgeted. Same for heating oil, we reduced that. And then for leads, we had budgeted for risers and some tables. We've identified funds in this year's budget to be able to pay for those, so we're just going to buy them now. So we've removed them from the budget. We had two increases that we needed to take care of. One was in the business office. This is in warrant article system administration. With the change in staffing, with Andrea Hammond retiring, we neglected to properly budget for benefits for the potential new employee. Normally, we would probably not, if this were in warrant article 1, we probably wouldn't be concerned. Warrant article 2 is budgeted so tightly that if someone should come in and have to take that, it could throw off that warrant article. So we didn't feel like it was responsible to just leave it at 0. It's 0 right now, right?
It was, now it's been updated.
So in the current budget, there's no benefits. But it just didn't, we just felt like there wasn't enough wiggle room within that warrant article. Again, if it were warrant article 1, we wouldn't have worried about it. The other thing, and I'm going to ask Rebecca to speak to this a little bit, we got word this week of some changes in some out-of-district special ed tuition. So I'll let Rebecca just do a quick update.
Yep. So we've received information in terms of our out-of-district tuition costs, and then the increases for that for students. So that we went back to reflect the budget to include those increases. So it's the daily tuition rates that increase year after year for students. We were able to calculate that.
So unfortunately, we didn't get that until the beginning of the week. It was a Wednesday, Tuesday. It's been quite a week with the budget. It's been a lot of things happening. So we did not feel comfortable leaving that budget line the way that it was, knowing that increase. And I will just say, Rebecca and I, $67,000 does not reflect the full increase, but similar to the personnel, we feel like it's reasonable increase that we can live with it. But it is not the full amount. It's about double that, right? To make sure that it's, but there's some circumstances within there that makes us feel like this is reasonable. So the total amount of reductions from the total budget is $109,144. The next thing I wanted to make sure that you got an update on was around regular instruction, warrant article 1, which has to do with the 2 teachers that we said we were removing from the budget. So I'm gonna let Evan talk about that.
So we've been talking about this since we did our executive summaries, and again, when we talked about warrant Article 1, without the specificity that we have today. So after working with Mrs. Poulin and guidance and looking at course requests and class sizes and things of that nature, the two positions that we are not going to be filling to start next school year, the first one is currently an open world languages teacher. We will continue to offer 3 languages for the next school year. We'll have Spanish 1 through 4, Latin 1 through 4, and French 1 through 3. We will need to reevaluate that when it comes to course signups for next year to see what we can and can't do with that level of staffing. But for the 23-24 school year, we will continue to offer the 3 languages that we have right now. And then the other position is an English teacher position. This position was filled at the beginning of this year as a 1-year position. This reduction will not impact our course offerings. It does have a slight impact on class sizes, but overall, we will have the same classes and courses that we offer currently.
So the last thing we wanted to do for an update is, and I'll ask Gabby to talk to this, is the revenue page calculations to make sure that we can see the impact that these changes have. That's too big, hang on.
Well, you can move it around, right?
Okay.
So everybody can see it?
Yeah.
All right. So the first thing that Carrie discussed on the 8279 is that our subsidy increased. It went up by $370,678 that we're receiving from the state, which then reduced the required contribution down from $8,444,493 to $8,073,816. And then that also reduced the local additional another $109,000. So in the end, Carrie, can you go down a little bit further? When we started this budget process, the percentage to the towns that we were anticipating was 19.1%. We're down to 13.63%, which is $479,821 less than when we started. So we're pretty excited about that.
And the budget increase right now is 7.36. And again, when we started, we were at 8. I can't remember that document's in there.
We were at 8.44%.
So we've been able to reduce it a complete percentage point over the course from day 1 to now with various reductions. So before we go to the warrant articles, I just want to make sure people don't have any questions about any of those updates, the 8279, anything else? Any questions?
Just for Evan, so the English teacher that we put in, and it was just for 1 year, what was that in regards to? Was it class size?
It was filling a position that was open, but because it was so late in the hiring season, we just did it for the year. It's a position that we've had.
Okay, so.
Evan and I worked on this in the fall. When he was hiring and filled the position, you can go ahead. Filled the position, I think it was September.
Yeah.
I was like, all right, since we're hiring so late, let's just make it a 1-year position. That way, since we're not sure and we're hiring late, and I think it was even somebody who was emergency certification maybe, didn't have experience.
We had to work that out.
Yeah, I think both that and a social studies position, both of which were filled very late. We just filled them as a 1-year position. We did the same in green when we hired an elementary teacher late. We just made it a 1-year position. So it wasn't a new position that was 1 year. We just did that for the sake of the hiring process so that we could then open it for as broad a hiring process as possible in the spring.
Thank you.
Any questions on any of those updates? Sean? Thank you. There's quite a lot of updating to start things out with.
So again, the budget website's been updated. All the documents we're looking at tonight are, nope, okay, we sent them.
The individual who updates our website was out today, so we hope that he will be in tomorrow to put them up. So I apologize on the delay. I didn't make all of the changes until this morning.
Yeah, so they will be updated tomorrow. And a reminder to everybody that the district budget meeting is 6 o'clock at the high school on May 4th, and the referendum vote is in your town offices from 1 to 7 on Thursday, May 18th. Hi.
Yes, I am always late to everything.
All right, so we are going to do an update. Oh, wait, is this, sorry. the agenda item, I'm jumping.
So we've done the updating type items, yeah. So 2.1.1 would be revisit list for warrant articles 8, 9, 10, 11, and 14.
Did not get any.
There was nothing that was placed on a revisit list there, so that one is a quick consideration. So that brings us to warrant article 4 for line-by-line consideration, and that is other instruction.
We do have some updates on that if you want to hear those first.
Yes, please.
Okay.
Just some highlights that you'll see as you go through the line by line of warrant article 4 under 9 through 12. You'll notice that there's a fairly substantial decrease in summer school stipends. That's not because we're having less summer school stipends. That's just to accurately reflect the actual number of stipends we have. For some reason in this year's budget it was inflated. And I'm going to end it at that. There's also a reduction in co-curricular equipment. That's a fairly substantial reduction as well. It's going to be around $20,000. That was year 1 of the lighting project in the auditorium. That is now being taken care of through grant funds, and it will no longer be reflected in the budget. There's an increase of $10,000 under athletic supplies. That is the $10,000 for purchasing of uniforms that we discussed when we did our executive summaries. There is an increase in athletic software. This reflects the cost of software for impact testing, scheduling software, and a software system to manage student information, athletic contracts, physicals, things of that nature. There's also a increase of about $3,000 in athletic equipment. That is to purchase a new set of soccer goals. There is a decrease in athletic dues and fees. This represents the cost of this year's state Nordic ski meet that was held in Fort Kent. It's not being held in Fort Kent next year. So that is, we're not budgeting to go to Fort Kent because we're not going. But you will see a small increase in athletic transportation. This reflects projected mileage over the course of the next year's seasons.
Middle school, two things that Jana wanted to highlight.
So for the middle school, we're asking for an increase in the equipment line by about $10,600. One is for the replacement of the field hockey goals, which is just part of sort of the natural process and where we're at. And the second is the addition of football uniforms, and I'm going to let Coach speak to that one.
Yes. The football uniforms, what we've done in the past is we've always had the parents buy one jersey, and it was one color, it was green. So 2 years ago, year before last, we moved into a new league in football, and several of the teams that we've been playing have the same color jerseys as we do, and it's become an issue with referees and opposing teams that they can't tell the difference between one team and another team because of the color. So we've never had home and away jerseys. We've always just had home jerseys. So this year we're proposing that we buy the home and away jerseys through the school and keep them and hand them out every year. What we've done in the past is that the parents have bought the jersey and then they've kept it for their child. So we're going to, we'd like to be able to hand out those uniforms every year, take them back in at the end of the year, and then hand them out to the next ones the next year. And so they're a quality jersey. We don't foresee having to replace, maybe one or two would get ripped in the course of a season, but that would be pretty minimal as far as replacing them go. So they should last a long time, and we'd satisfy the requirements of the league, which ought to have a home and away jersey, so that we can just distinguish teams one from the other. So that's why we've got that money in there for those jerseys. We looked into trying to do reversible jerseys, but the cost was quite a bit more than this was, so we figured this would be the best way to go.
Thank you. Anything else for updates on warrant article 4? All right, page 1 on warrant article 4.
Can I ask a follow-up question to Coach Hathaway?
Jessica?
Just a follow-up. Are there any other middle school teams that have away and home jerseys, or are they all just home?
Should want to know if any other schools have home and away jerseys.
Not schools, our middle school teams, sorry.
Oh, yes, all the teams that we have here, some are reversible for basketball,
Yep.
for example, it's reversible to distinguish white for home and green for away. We looked into the reversible ones for football, and they're actually more expensive than purchasing 2 separate jerseys.
So that's pretty standard, not, okay, that's what I was wondering.
Other questions on page 1? If there's nothing on page 1, we'll go to page 2. Questions on page 2? Mr. Shaw, I think you spoke to the summer school stipend. That's an adjustment to reflect what those actual numbers are. We anticipate them
Yes,
to be.
that's right.
Same coverage as far as summer school. Thank you. Questions on page 2? If not, moving on to page 3. Questions on page 3? So on page 3, we see in LAHS athletic supplies, that increase is around uniforms. And that is a departure from what we've done in the past.
Yes, so for as long as I can remember, jerseys have been purchased or uniforms have been purchased by booster organizations. And this would be a definite change, but one that I think is in line with what other schools do with their athletic programs. And even though this money, Mr. LaRoche has a plan that's all mapped out to distribute some of the funds each season on a revolving basis. This will not cover the entire cost of a new set of uniforms, but it'll be a lot closer than what we're doing now, and the booster organizations will pick up the difference.
So there'll still be some cost that boosters will.
Much minimal though, what they're doing now.
And just to speak to what Evan said, it is typical that, I mean, I've never had, when I was a principal, parents never bought the uniforms. It was always a school-funded thing. So I was a little surprised that that was the case here. So that's why I supported it.
Questions on page 3? If there are no questions on page 3, we'll move to page 4. Questions on page 4. Skiing supplies at Levitt?
The team size increased.
Thank you.
So did the cost of wax, but
Thank you. Other questions on page 4? If there are no other questions on page 4, we'll move on to 2.1.3, which is warrant article 5, and that is student and staff support. Updates on
This
one?
is Wally and Teresa, right?
Correct.
Are you coming up here or you staying?
I think I'm gonna stay, is that okay?
Got it.
I mean, I can. I'll stay. You've got this. So under warrant article 5, the big ticket item here, well, there's a lot of big ticket items, is the addition of a school resource officer. And then Wally is going to go over the changes in technology. And we did move funds, so the substitute lines for nurses will be down, but they've just been put into the general substitute lines. They're not separated out anymore, because we are fortunate to have some substitutes that are nurses.
And for the technology stuff, 5 staff devices, I'm trying to start a cycle so that we don't fall behind and have one big year of, we need a bunch of devices, so. And that's in line with the old technology plan, and the refresh cycle for that. The supplies to utilize, one of the proposals was for iPads at the middle school, supplement their program. So you'll see an increase to their line for the supplies for that. We're going to take the iPads and reuse them that are outgoing for that to kind of decrease the cost. Google Workspace backup, we don't have any backup outside of our Google Workspace environment, and most of our data is living there now instead of on-prem as it's been in the past where we did have backups. So there's a line to increase that, or add that rather. The supply line increases are district-wide, you'll notice, when we get to the page-by-page review, have all increased substantially. That's kind of a compounding issue, so that includes toner, which through 2020, 2021, between remote learning, hybrid learning, all that, didn't really get leverage. We came back in 22, those lines shot through the roof. There was a lot of increases in toner and printer-related costs throughout the pandemic. And so they were well overspent in 2022. There wasn't a direct year for last year, so that didn't get increased for this year. So it looks real bad, but it's kind of compounded by 2 years of not being acknowledged. There was a significant decrease in the TMS repair and insurance line. The devices we have currently are covered by insurance as part of the purchase of them for 1 more year, so we brought that line down. And as far as so repair and insurance, the insurance came with it, and then therefore the repairs are being covered by the insurance. And then software subscriptions, you'll see the significant decrease in that, but really just moved to the appropriate warrant article, which is
Regular instruction.
regular instruction.
Questions on any of the updates?
I have some questions.
Tammy?
I have several, actually. I'll start with you. Just a little bit of information for my brain to understand. When you're talking about the student safety monitoring, I'm assuming that somehow if there's a concern, there's some sort of flagging that takes place for the tech department to follow up. How does that actually work?
We were just talking about that earlier today.
We were. So there's still some details to iron out, but basically, depending on the level of the threat or concern, it'll either generate an email to, again, we have to establish who that's going to go to, whether it'll be me in addition to billing admins, maybe counselors. So we're still ironing out the details of that. But again, so if it's a low-level concern or threat, it would be just an email to follow up on. If it's an immediate concern or threat, it would generate phone calls in order of importance.
Okay. So it's sort of tiered?
Yes.
As far as the response that's needed?
Correct.
Okay, that's pretty interesting. The other question that I have is around the Apple Pencils. Will those be staying with the teacher?
Yes.
Because there's like only 20 of them.
Right.
They're fairly expensive, and I just kind of was wondering whose hands those were going to be in most of the time.
Yeah. So if there's a supplement with the iPads, which will stay in, all
In the
together
classroom.
in the classroom.
Okay, great. And then I know I've already asked this question, but I would like to say it out loud. I think the resource officer is an excellent addition. I am also just wondering, we were just discussing traffic around the schools, and just wondering if part of the job description might be monitoring some of the comings and goings during before and after school in particular.
So I can speak to that just in my own experience. So that was one of the things we needed a resource officer to do. was to monitor traffic, especially at those high volume times, to make sure things were running smoothly. And in fact, if our resource officer, when I was at Poland, was going to be out, he would get coverage for that high traffic time. So he would ask, if as long as they weren't on another call, he would ask them to come and cover that if it was something that he was concerned about. I think especially this campus, right, is very high traveled, and like things are funneled into a pretty, and so that was absolutely, and that was my experience as a principal. It was sort of like two schools, one way in, one way out. I was actually worse than here, so it was definitely part of the job description.
Just along those same lines, so I see that the SRO is out of our high school budget, but is that person going to be responsible for district-wide?
No, the SRO is, I thought, district-wide. Yeah, it's a district-wide expense.
Okay.
Page 11.
So it's in the middle, it's other student support, so it's a district-wide position.
Okay, perfect.
I mean, they will likely be housed at the high school,
Yeah.
but the expectation would be that they provide the services. The elementary principals can call for assistance. If they need to do a home visit, there's truancy issues, anything like that, that they would be available for those people.
Thank you.
Other questions on the updates? If not, we'll move on to the line by line. All right. Page 1. Jessica.
So line, let's see, 21905800 TPS 504 compliance. I was just curious what that compliance piece means. Is that like for meetings or?
So that would be for, I don't know exactly what this is for, but typically if a student needs some sort of amplification system or something that is required under their 504 plan, the schools budget for that. And it might be it might be cleaning of the device, it might be the actual purchase. It depends on the needs of the student.
So 504 is Americans with Disabilities Act,
Right.
and so just saying that out loud for everybody. So whatever they need to be able to overcome whatever barriers there are is what would be in that line.
Okay.
And so through all of those lines, it will vary because it depends on the needs of the students that are in the school.
Understood. Thank you.
But also part of that line is our software that we use to be able to shift students from year to year and school to school with their plans, and we have an electronic kind of housing system to have their plans on. Welcome.
Other questions on page 1? This is one that shows up in several different locations when we look at 52510. This one's TPS, staff tuition teachers. Those numbers are based on.
So we took a survey, each principal took a survey of their staff to see who was intending on taking courses, and we budgeted based on people saying they wanted courses this year.
And this is coursework that the district pays for because of our collective
Contracts.
bargaining.
Yes, correct.
Thank you. Other questions on page 1? Moving on to page 2. Questions on page 2? Crystal.
More of a generic question. I believe we will be talking about each of the libraries, and refresh my memory. Mrs. Lashman, I think she's here. There she is. Each pupil is given like a certain, or we try to do a certain amount of money each year. I feel like I remember this from last year for each kid allotted for a certain amount
Yeah,
of.
we do, it's a $22.50 per student, but at Leeds, there's a flat amount because of the number of students. Like it's a lower number of students, so it wouldn't be a decent book budget.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions on page 2? If there are no other questions on page 2, we move to page 3. Questions questions on page 3? If there are no questions on page 3, we'll move on to page 4. Questions on page 4. Questions on page 4. If not, we'll move on to page 5. Questions on page 5. For example, on page 5 is that line 56500. That's where we see some of the toner printing and some other supply.
Right, and I should have mentioned in the update that it's also where the cases for the proposed new budgets for third grade and kindergarten would be.
Thank you. Jessica?
Do we have some restructuring of our librarians? It looks like there's some money.
I can speak to that.
Yeah.
There is a librarian that's shared among the elementary schools, and there is a shift in the percentage of time on how it was budgeted last year or our current year to this year.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other questions on page 5? Any other type of questions on page 5? Let's go to page 6. If I can just turn the page. Questions on page 6? Any questions on page 6? If not, we'll move on to page 7. Questions on page 7? Any questions on page 7? No? Move to page 8. Questions on page 8? Questions on page 8? If not, we'll move on to page 9. Questions on page 9? If there are no questions on page 9, we move to page 10. Questions on page 10? Any questions on page 10? No questions on page 10? We'll try page 11. Thank you.
I just would like someone to tell me a little bit more about 2119 other student support. What that means, fill in the blanks for me.
Sorry, what line?
It's 2190 other student support.
What page?
On page 11.
The resource officer?
I think that's right.
Is that it?
Oh,
yes. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay.
Sorry,
yes.
I didn't.
That's the school resource officer.
Easy, okay.
And just a reminder, that's a contract. They won't be our employee, they're an employee of the sheriff's department that we contract with.
And SW is system-wide.
System-wide.
Okay. All right.
Thank you. Anything else on page 11?
Yeah.
Tammy?
Read underneath that, that next line, I guess it's 51040. Can I have a little more information about what that is too?
I think that's the assistant superintendent's salary.
Yep.
It is?
Yeah. But that number is also spread to the, isn't it another warrant article too?
There are. It's in warrant article 1 as well.
Oh.
Right, yeah. because
Okay,
it's
so
yeah.
these
It's
are,
under gifted and
Oh.
talented. It's
ELL,
divided.
gifted and
Yeah.
talented, and
I'm just having a hard time discerning that these are salaries, I'm
Yeah.
sorry. Okay, thank you.
Other questions on page 11?
Sorry about that.
If there's nothing else on page 11, move to page 12. Questions on page 12? I had a question on the Google Workspace backup. There was some mention, I think, made in the executive summary that that would afford us some protection in the event of some sort of ransomware. Is that?
Yep. Because it's a storage space separate from our Google Workspace, so if our active environment were to be infected somehow, this would be something we got backup from.
Do we have other protections in place in the event of something exciting like that, or is that?
I mean, so we actively have, like, we have antivirus clients on our Windows machines. The Chrome OS in the nature of its design is fairly good at not allowing that to happen. So it's mostly Windows and Mac, which we have antivirus in place for. I mean, we have our firewalls. We have protections in place to, in theory, stop these things, but of course, not everything's bulletproof.
Questions on page
52560, district-wide technology admin tuition. Looks like it's new to this year.
It is new to this year. So this year, Wally has decided to increase his education and become more versed in all things technological. And this is a part of it.
Wonderful.
Weren't you in a master's program when we hired you?
Yeah,
So,
I'm actively in the master's.
right, so it wasn't there because he wasn't an employee before.
Yeah, thank you.
Other questions on 12? If not, moving on to page 13. Questions on page 13? If there are no questions on page 13, we'll move on to warrant Article 6, and that is system administration. Do we have updates on that one?
So warrant article 6 is what I think 2.6% of the budget. It's a very small, tight budget. It covers the superintendent's office and the business office. So really the only major changes in there are changes in benefits, primarily because there's a bunch of new people and some of our current employees changed their elections. We know that we're going to need to spend more for our audit fees for next year. We've been sort of given that update from the auditors, so we budget appropriately. There's a printing and binding line that has been there for a while and not really fully spent. And I think there used to be a mailing out of a newsletter periodically, and all that's done through email. Once we realized what the line had been intended for, we were like, we don't need that anymore. It's not the budget mailer, that one we do budget for, so this was more just newsletters from the superintendent's office. And then just a general increase in supplies due to increased costs. So those are the sort of the highlights. No new proposals, no new staff members, nothing like that.
Any questions on those updates? If not, we can move on to page 1. Questions on page 1? Jessica.
I always have 1,000 questions.
Go
Sorry.
for it.
So, school board legal fees. I see what we were budgeted for last year, and I just feel like we've been using our lawyers' services a lot more this year than any year that I can remember, and we've budgeted the same amount of money.
Yep. I think there were some unanticipated things that occurred. So one, I'm a new superintendent, so I'm probably using it more than the previous superintendent did, correct? So I anticipate that as I get more and more experience that I will need to consult less. We will absolutely be overspent in legal fees this year. The hope would be that next year that's not the case. Some of that is we are engaged in interest-based bargaining process with the Teachers Association, which is going to be a more expensive thing. Our hope is that by engaging in that process, the process ends up in a better place. And certainly, I think I've reported the book challenge was also a chunk of legal fees. So we did not increase this number, anticipating that it will not be the same level of need next year, but it's entirely possible it will go over.
Other questions on page 1? There are no other questions on page 1. Moving on to page 2. Questions on page 2. Questions on page 2. There's a reduction in 55320 superintendent office telephone. Is that a change in?
No, that's a change in actual expenses. We tried to budget according to what was actually being charged to those lines.
Thank you. Other questions on page 2? If there are no other questions on page 2, we'll move to page 3. Questions on page 3?
Can I go back to 2? On the advertisement, what's that consist of?
That's when we advertise open positions.
I think we use serving schools, so that's a program we pay a fee for. And that is a statewide, and in some cases beyond the state of Maine, place where it is common for education positions to be posted. So we pay a fee for that. Trying to think if there's any other fees that we pay for.
Well, if we advertise in the paper for perhaps the superintendent position or business manager position, anything like that, when we advertise for bids, when we're going out to bid for something, these would be covered under this expense line as well.
Thank you.
Other questions on page 2 or page 3? If there's nothing else on warrant article 6, we can move to 2.1.5, and that is warrant article 7, school administration. Updates on this one.
So just some updates. The primary change, so we've had a couple of different administrators, a bunch of new secretaries, especially at the elementary level. So there was a lot of fluctuation in terms of benefits in particular. We did shift the school dean of students from an administrative position into a regular instruction position. So that's probably the major reduction there. And then and Teresa, I'm going to make sure that I have this right. All the books and periodicals that the principals had, we've moved into grant funding. So you'll see all of those lines zeroed out, but they will be able to access grant funding to make sure they have the materials they need. So this warrant article is like weirdly up 0.27% with all that. So.
Questions on page 1? Questions on page 1? If there are no questions on page 1, moving to page 2. Questions on page 2? Questions on page 2? If there are no questions on page 2, moving to page 3. Questions on page 3? If there are no questions on page 3, moving to page 4. Questions on page 4? Questions on page 4? If there are no questions on page 4, moving to page 5. Questions on page 5? If there are no questions on page 5, moving to page 6. Any questions on page 6, the final page of warrant article 7? If there are no other questions, moving on to 2.1.6, and that brings us to warrant article 18, that is adult education.
Brian, come on up.
The price is right. So some highlights that you've already seen in other categories. We have had a reduction in benefits due to staff changes and different elections this year. We are still a bit in flux. You also notice that workforce training tuition costs were eliminated as redundant. We have them in other staff areas for staff to access additional education. Some increases that you might notice, we did have an increase in a teacher salary. We hired a STEAM coordinator to bring us into the 21st century and give our students a little bit better background there. There are some software increases due to higher costs of software licenses as well as additional machines. We are training all of our students to be Microsoft compliant. And there was an increase in our essential education, which is our high-step preparation software. That's the equivalency diploma. We also have already noted in another area, but the adult education program is requesting an increase of $23,000. That's in the 16 to 20-year-old line. That would return us to the levels that we had during before the pandemic and reflect the additional students that we were starting this year. And just for your own information, enrichment is entirely self-funded by user fees, so it does not come out of taxpayer funding.
Questions on that, please? No, we'll move into the line-by-line consideration. Questions on page 1? Any questions on page 1? Not. Page 2. Questions on page 2? Questions on page 2? There are no questions on page 2. Moving to page 3. Questions on page 3? There are no questions on page 3. Moving to page 4. Questions on page 4? There are no questions on page 4. Moving to page 5. Any questions on page 5, which is the final page of the warrant article 18? And that does, as the whispered cheer in the back suggested, bring us to the completion of our consideration of the individual warrant articles. That brings us to 2.1.7, and that is public comment on the budget. So the same kind of rules of engagement apply for this particular public comment session as it does in our item 4. We see later on, so I will read through our policy so everybody understands where we're at on that. Members of the public may address the board within the guidelines provided in this policy. The chair shall be responsible for maintaining proper order and compliance with these guidelines. The following guidelines shall apply to public participation at board meetings. Citizens and employees of the school unit are welcome to participate as provided in this policy. Others may be recognized to speak at the chair's discretion. Individual employees and/or employee groups will not be permitted to discuss matters for which complaint or grievance procedures are provided. The chair may limit the time allotted for comments on a particular topic, as well as the time each individual may speak, and we're at 3 minutes on that one. In the event of a sizable audience, the chair may require persons interested in speaking to sign up so they may be called on in a fair and efficient manner. During the time set aside for public participation, the chair will be responsible for recognizing all speakers who must identify themselves as they begin the topic. Speakers are not permitted to share gossip, make defamatory comments, or use abusive or vulgar language. All speakers are to address the chair and direct questions or comments to particular board members of the superintendent only with approval of the chair. Requests for information or concerns that require further research may be referred to the superintendent to be addressed at a later time. Members of the board and the superintendent may ask questions of any person who addresses the board, but are expected to refrain from arguing or debating issues. Questions must be addressed through the chair. No complaints or allegations will be allowed at board meetings concerning any person employed by the school system or against particular students. Personal matters or complaints concerning student or staff issues will not be considered in a public meeting, but will be referred through established policies and procedures. In order to make efficient use of meeting time, the board discourages duplication or repetition of comments to the board. The board requests that groups or organizations be represented by designated spokespersons. The chair has the authority to stop any presentation that violates these guidelines or the privacy rights of others. Persons who disrupt the meeting may be asked to leave, and the chair may request law enforcement assistance as necessary to restore order. All right, do we have folks who are interested in commenting on the budget? Super quiet in here. Yep, and if you would like to introduce yourself?
Sure, yeah. My name's Amanda Peralta. I have students at both the elementary school in Turner and at Levitt. So I was just having watched from a distance, and it was brought up again tonight. It looked like the book challenge process was expensive. I mean, you all had copies up there. There were lots of lawyer time having sat there. It felt like 3 hours. I'm sure it was 45 minutes, but it was the end of the day. And I think if it were a one-time thing, it wouldn't be a concern. But we all know school budgets are tight. There's not a lot of money to throw around. And the national mood and trend seems to be that it's not a one-time occurrence, that these happen over and over again. Hopefully we don't have a lot of those books in our library, so it won't be an issue, but I'm wondering if we planned for it. Or if maybe we need to change policy in some way so that it's less expensive, and funds that could be going to paying for jerseys for all of our kids, for example, aren't going towards lawyer fees and books that we don't even really want to have in the district in the first place. That's it. Thanks.
Do we have other folks that are interested in speaking? Yes.
I just wanted to know if this is a time to ask a question. Where is the resource officer going to be located in the schools? Does the officer make rounds, or is it in one building as opposed to another? Just sort of curiosity. Nice.
I mean, we haven't identified a specific spot yet, but they will primarily be housed at the high school and then spending time in the other districts. I mean, in the other schools.
Thank you.
Thank you. Other folks interested in speaking about the budget or to the budget? If not, 2.1.8 is a reminder that our next budget work session is April 6th at 6 p.m. at Green Central School.
And can I just add that night, the goal is for the board to vote and approve a final budget?
Correct.
Okay.
Item 3 is to act on the minutes of the 13th regular meeting, March 23rd. Any errors or omissions? Noted. If not, accept those under general consent. That brings us back around to public comment. Do we have public interested in commenting? Mr. Giles?
Hello, Jimmy Childs. I just want to remind everybody how hard I lobbied last year for the resource officer, so I'm glad that Miss Med put that through, but it shows that I do care about students. It shows that when it comes to masking, the whole reason I've come here is because I didn't think the kids should be masked for 7+ hours a day, 5 days a week. We did it for the first whole time before until the other year when Miss Brandt said we're going to put masks back on, that became a fight. Not that we're against masking or against suffocating our kids for a long time. I care about my kids as much as I care about yours. We're here now because of books, because we email you books. I had a personal incident with my child. It's very concerning, and these books remain in the school. These books do not belong in these schools. And I think that we should all be able to agree on this stuff. I'm not homophobic, I'm not transphobic, I'm not against nobody. I'm against hypersexualization of kids. And I don't want to have to make this into story hour. I don't think anybody deserves that, but we've asked for a subcommittee to be put together. Ms. Duplessis gave a list of the books. We really hope that you guys take us up on that, because like I said, I don't want to have to be story hour. And there's some really sick pictures in this book that's in our library. And I'm not going to show them to you guys, but they're very bad. So, please.
Thank you.
Should be ashamed.
Other folks interested in speaking?
Christine Duplicity, 2 kids in the district. I want to speak in support of policies proposed by Crystal Nichols that will affect the interests of children in our district while respecting the authority of parents to make health decisions for their children. The MSAD 52's board response to COVID was a blatant infringement of liberty. Everyone has the right to breathe freely. To make a kid's access to education depend on surrendering this right is evil and unconstitutional, even if it was done with the best intentions, which, if the saying is correct, pave the road to hell. Listen back over some of the public comments from when masking was required, and you'll hear parents in anguish that you caused. Mrs. Nichols' policies will help prevent the board from making such an un-American mistake again by giving it guidance and limits that you demonstrated through your poor judgment. Selective acceptance of facts are absolutely necessary. In this time when CDC, FDA, Department of Education, FBI, and Department of Justice, White House, and the Blaine House have lied and worked to silence and intimidate people who disagree, public trust has been lost. We don't trust you because you betrayed us. Earn some of that trust back by showing that you understand that mistakes were made and that policies to prevent those mistakes from being repeated are necessary. Because, as it is, if the CDC were to say tomorrow that kids should have to wear masks again, I have no doubt that the superintendent would agree and this board would again jump off the bridge because everyone else is doing it. Please give us a reason to trust you again.
My name is Thomas Johnson. I live in Turner and I have 3 children in MSAD 52. I'm also a physician. I attended Boston University School of Medicine and did my residency at University of Virginia. And the last 12 years I've worked in rural communities in Maine and another state. I came here today to address the citizen proposed policy. The citizens policy takes the current administration of medication policy and adds the term medical device. However, the term medical device does not have a clear definition in the policy. There are 3 classes of medical devices as defined by the FDA, which include insulin pumps, artificial heart valves, surgical masks, and knee braces, as well as many other items. Making this change would lead to confusion for students, staff, parents, and as well as students' healthcare providers. It would also significantly increase the administrative burden for our school's nurses. I reviewed the more than 100 pages of supporting evidence given to the board. The author is clearly primarily concerned with masking and attempts to cite vaccination recommendations and water fluoridation as evidence that public health mandates are harmful. It includes opinion articles from the anti-vaccine misinformation sources like the National Vaccine Information Center and Children's Health Defense, as well as an article from Joseph Mercola, who's an internet celebrity worth over $100 million, who sells vitamins as a cure to almost any illness. There's no peer-reviewed evidence-based literature about masking. The portion of the policy that gives me the most concern is the attempt to prevent the school district from enforcing what is referred to as coerced public health mandates. The author has written a policy that states that only the student, in consultation with their family and healthcare advocate of the family's choosing, has the authority to make basic health decisions. Does this mean that a school nurse can't send a student home with vomiting or a fever? The most insulting document to me as a physician is one that claims that physicians cannot be trusted because they receive incentive payments from insurance companies for achieving high rates of vaccination for their patients. I've sat on the board of an accountable care organization, and I can tell you that the interpretation of this is rife with a lack of misunderstanding. Regarding this, I would suggest asking yourself 2 questions. 1, why would an insurance company want their patients to receive vaccines unless they know it improves health and reduces their own cost? And 2, why are vaccination recommendations the same throughout the world regardless of the healthcare payment model if physicians only are motivated by financial incentives? The author clearly has no trust in the medical community. Education and experience are invalid. There are no experts when it comes to public health in their opinion. It's time to move on from the debate about masking. We need to let healthcare professionals guide public health. We need to let teachers teach. We need to stop creating senseless extra work for this board that extracts them from doing the work that upholds their mission to provide excellence in education.
Thank you so much.
My name is Crystal Nichols from Green. I brought forward these policies because my children, as well as the children of others, were injured and endangered by the forced suffocation of compulsory masking. The objective of these policies has always been the restoration of liberty, true safety, and protected rights of children and their parents that have been usurped. None of these policies violates any law. The source documents are entirely composed of MSAD 52 policies, Maine state statutes, constitutional, contractual protections, and international human rights treaties signed and ratified, as well as doctor-authored articles. Since my policies state nothing more than medical freedom, why all the resistance? Apparently, the constitutional rights for children to access information, encouraging them to insert objects in their rectum, is to be vehemently defended by board members. But the constitutional right to breathe is nothing so much as a conspiracy theory born of backwood parent folk. The dirty little secret is that thousands of constitutional and human rights violations have been committed, and these policies shine an inconvenient light on those who seek forevermore to maintain control over your child's breath, and they make no secret of it. Say the lawyers, the board's precious time cannot be spent in tying the hands of future boards by considering these policies. Here there is no legal criticism, but the indignant condemnation of anyone's having the temerity to stand up for rights denied. Our board's esteemed medical advisor has employed similarly weak and invalid arguments, the accusation that my policies do not align with evidence-based medicine. Children breathing as much oxygen as they require to support their brain growth and health is just not safe and effective to the bottom lines of medical institutions. Note here that the experts are always seeking to separate you from your own health. You could not possibly be wise enough to superintend the wellness of your children. The power over health must belong to the person taking the risk. Without medical freedom, we are nothing more than slaves. For if we have no control over our health, we have no control over our lives. Despite false allegations to the contrary, my policies align perfectly with public health, for they give health to the public, and that they protect medical freedom. And if you support public health measures, by law, it must be consent-oriented, not compelled, based on compassion, not fear, and suspended at the appearance of injury, not extended indifferently. Thank you.
Any other folks that are interested in commenting? I'm going to go over.
Michelle Hathaway, I'm a parent of 2 children in the district as well as a school administrator for a private school sector. I'm also opposed to the citizen policy that has been presented to the board. I'd like to fully believe that we will not experience another pandemic in my lifetime. I actually really hold on to that hope every single day. But should we exhibit a global pandemic or another national health crisis, I would ask that we look to the CDC, to the American Academy of Pediatrics, and to the Maine Department of Education to again create policy and guidance that we would follow. I also cannot stress enough that at this point we need to move away from the pandemic and the effects of this. We need to focus on the curriculum and instruction and mental health needs of our students, and that the further we continue to engage in these conversations, the longer we delay the real work that needs to be done.
Any other folks that are interested in speaking? Yes, we have one in front. Yes.
So I guess I would just want to start by saying I think that parents and the consultation piece where medical decisions should always be made in consultation with the parents and the student themselves is critical. I think we all probably feel that way. We just want to go about it different ways. The 504 already exists as a way that conversation can be held between the district and parents. And so I don't have a problem with the general idea that these decisions should be made in concert with parents and their opinions are important. But I've read the policies themselves and I find the policies to be flawed. The policy regarding against coercive measures is full of the word fraudulent without any explanation for how fraudulency would be determined, which seems fairly important. And the policy regarding right to breathe, if taken strictly, as someone who has to keep up with CPR certification, if read strictly, raises concerns for legal obstacles to providing CPR, Heimlich maneuver, and other, basic necessary interventions if followed strictly. And then where medical devices was added, and also there's a piece regarding policies handed down by anyone who's been in litigation. I mean, those policies, that includes the US government, that includes the state of Maine, that includes MSAD 52. There's lots of litigation. So we would then approve a policy which invalidated our rights to make policy for ourselves. So I think the policies themselves need to be relooked at. But I think the bigger conversation about how to have parents included and feel good about the decisions that are being made is valid.
Good evening. My name is Evan Barris and I live in Leeds. I'm the father of 2 students in this district, the proud husband of one of the board members, and an emergency room physician who has been serving the community since 2015. I am double boarded in emergency medicine and pediatric emergency medicine. I am the medical director and chief of staff of one of our region's critical access hospitals and the medical director of one of our region's ambulance services. I am also a proud graduate of Levitt's class of 1999. I stand before you today as a frontline healthcare worker to ask that you vote in opposition of this anti-science, anti-public health, anti-mask proposal before you today. Masks are safe, masks are inexpensive, and masks are an effective tool for helping to prevent infection transmission, thereby keeping our children, their families, and our community safe and healthy. A small sampling of the national and international medical groups that support mask usage include the American Medical Association, the World Health Organization, the American Nurses Association, the American College of Emergency Physicians, the American Academy of Family Physicians, the American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, the American College of Surgeons, and the American Academy of Pediatricians, just to name a few. The American Academy of Pediatricians, one of the main bodies that provides healthcare standards in this country for our children, quote, strongly endorses the use of safe and effective infection control measures to protect children and adolescents. COVID-19 vaccination, ventilation, physical distancing, testing, and the use of well-fitting and comfortable mask or respirator are all part of a comprehensive strategy to mitigate risk and help reduce the spread of COVID-19, end quote. This type of unfounded, fear-driven restriction on the board's ability to follow national and local public health recommendations would severely limit our district's ability to respond successfully to a similar deadly health crisis in the future. Please stand with those of us in the medical community working to protect our children in these unprecedented times. Please vote against these proposals. Thank you.
Nicole Hart for Turner. Allowing sexually explicit materials and placing one protected class over another under the guise of the rainbow is causing tension in the LGBTQ community. And it is segregating children on how they identify. This is placing students that identify as LGBTQ and those questioning at a higher risk than those who don't identify as such. I am a member of the LGBTQ community, and I am mortified that these sexually explicit books are what you have chosen to be pushed upon students to reflect what this community is about, and to aid those that may be questioning the sexuality. These books do not represent the LGBTQ community. They are misleading in a potentially unhealthy direction that could have damaging results in many aspects. Pushing pornography books and indoctrinating children to a particular lifestyle while they are still discovering life and who they are is grooming. Having to stand here before you and tell you all this is demoralizing. You are erasing everything my community has fought for. Why are sexually explicit books being pushed only about the LGBT community, and why aren't the same type of books being pushed on heterosexuals? What books do you have in comparison? Please explain what educational values these types of books hold as to why it is so important for you to defend or want in our schools. Children deserve to be just kids, and your focus needs to be prioritized on their core academics, which current test scores prove. Did you even take into consideration that exposure to sexually explicit materials may lead a child to normalize and become desensitized to high-risk behaviors, shaping a child's expectation in relationships, blurring boundaries, and increasing a child's risk of victimization? For children without an understanding of healthy sexual exposure to pornography materials, especially violent porn, incest, rape, can be traumatic. Asking people how they sexually identify, what their pronouns are, providing references, and displaying sexually explicit materials can and is harassment, sexual harassment, if it is offensive to one. Creating safe spaces, displaying flags, posters, etc. that only identify LGBTQ students and excluding students who don't identify as such is discriminatory and exclusive. Your inclusive and equity policies and materials are placed in one protected class over another as excluding protected classes, which is a direct violation of the Maine Human Rights Act, which we are all equally under. Implementing policies and procedures that exclude a parent or a legal guardian and persuading students to keep secrets from them is an overreach of both their rights. I advise you to read the Protection of Pupil Rights and FERPA, which is found on the U.S. Department of Education website. Your decisions impact the health and well-being of students, which can cause irreparable damage to their academic futures. As board members, your job is to remain non-biased to ensure that all students' rights are being equally protected. Calling people anti-gay, anti-trans for expressing concerns reflects poorly upon our school's morals in an unprofessional, inappropriate manner and sends a message that your biased opinions won't ensure equity for everyone. Thank you.
My name is Leslie Bradbury. I'm a member of the community, a parent in the community, and a board-certified family medicine physician of the community. The majority of my career I've spent practicing full-spectrum family medicine, which means patients spanning from newborns to their final days and everything in between, in both the hospital and the clinics. I've taken care of the most vulnerable and the least vulnerable. I can say with confidence I have not evaluated, diagnosed, or treated a single possible presumed or proven mask injury. I care immensely about the mental and physical health of the children in this community. Throughout the COVID-19 pandemic, when it came to mask mandating, everyone wanted to answer the question, do they work? The simple answer is yes, but it gets more complicated based upon the specific questions we are asking. Did it help us lift a stay-home mandate? Yes. Did it help us get our kids back into the classroom? Yes. Did it afford us the opportunity to develop testing protocols and access to tests for schools, medical facilities, and the communities? Yes. Did it buy us time in the process of developing a vaccine as an option for those who desired it? Yes. Did it allow us to release antiviral agents to treat high-risk individuals? Yes. We relied on the state and national CDC to provide guidelines. 100%, they are the expert opinion. Ultimately, masking prevented a full collapse of an overwhelmed medical system. It's hard to appreciate the significance of that because fortunately we have never experienced it. There are concerns that masks may harm kids, impairing their ability to breathe or slowing their social and emotional development or causing anxiety. That's terrifying to hear as a parent, but fortunately experts have shown the science does not back up those worries. Kids and adults state that they have difficulty breathing with a mask. Yes, this is proven to be subjective. Multiple scientific studies have confirmed there's no difference in heart rates or oxygen levels, even when done on young athletes playing sports wearing triple-layer masks. I certainly have concerns about the stress and anxiety levels across all ages and changes from the pandemic. It's concerning that students may not feel empowered to communicate their physical or emotional symptoms. I believe that we should focus on that, helping them with coping mechanisms. As parents, we get to have the benefit of making decisions on behalf of our children and their well-being, but this cannot be at the expense or safety of others. I do feel confident that mask mandating is behind us for the foreseeable future. That is a relief even for me, but I cannot predict the future. I would have never anticipated seeing a pandemic of this nature in my lifetime, so please consider carefully the safety of the current and future generations when making any decisions regarding masking.
Anyone else wishing to comment? And just a reminder from a process standpoint, if there are items upcoming on the agenda that you wish to speak to, now would be the time to do so. Anyone else wishing to comment? Nope, if you've already commented, then that's.
So I'm supposed to have 3 minutes later on to address about policy.
If discussion is warranted at that time, yes, our procedural rules dictate that there would be no discussion absent a motion directing the board to take some sort of action.
No, I thought I got 3 minutes to introduce that.
Yep. If there is discussion at that point. Any other public comment? If not, that brings us to communications, item number 5.
Yes, so I have two resignations. Alicia Lavoy, food service assistant, who's district-wide, takes effect April 14th. Randy Hausman, special ed tech 3 at Leavitt High School, took effect on March 17th. We have one notice of retirement, Maria Jaboon, school nurse at Turner Primary School. Our district nurse. She is retiring. Good for Maria. Yes. Yay, Maria. I had to tell her that 5 times, like, congratulations, you're retiring. So that is effective at the end of the school year. We only have 12 ed tech openings, and we filled the Title I ed tech 3 at Leeds Central School effective March 23rd.
Brings us to adjustments to the agenda.
We do not need an executive session.
And that's 9.7.
9.7.
9.9.
Oh, whoa. What is 9.7? I thought it was the...
9.7 was approved.
Oh, sorry. So 2 adjustments then. My apologies. We do not need to approve that field trip. We also will not need an executive session 9.9. The committee does not have any other updates from last week.
Thank you. That brings us to committee reports. 7.1, Mr. Shostak.
Yeah, I would like to make an adjustment to the agenda, please. I would like, under new business, for the board to deliberate directing the Curriculum and Policy Committee to research and recommend amendments to IJJ, the selection of educational materials that would add greater restrictions on sexually explicit content.
Is there a second to that?
Can you repeat that? I'm sorry, I didn't quite get the whole thing.
Sure. I would like, under new business, the board to deliberate a motion to direct the Curriculum and Policy Committee to research and recommend amendments to IJJ that would add greater restrictions to sexually explicit content.
Is there a second for that?
IJJ, sorry.
That's the selection of educational materials.
And that's not on here right now. You'd want to add it, though.
Correct.
Is there a second to that? Second, Kyle? For there to be an adjustment to the agenda, that requires a 2/3 vote.
Point of order, that's actually not true. We have not adopted the agenda by vote, so it's just majority.
I'm going to stick with the 2/3 vote. That's been the advice that we've received.
That would be an illegal restriction.
I disagree. Discussion on the motion to adjust the agenda. Jamie?
You were first, Jess, go ahead.
So
Jessica.
are you looking for us to discuss if that should go to CNP to be discussed? Like, the only action that we would be taking would be to send it to CNP for discussion?
Exactly so.
Okay. That's what I was trying to figure out.
Jamie?
That was my question as well. So you're not looking to discuss this right now. You're just looking for the board to instruct the CMP committee to take this up in committee.
Correct. That seems to me to be the proper way for policy to be fully researched for good amendments.
Can I just ask a clarification about the motion now? I understood the motion to say to discuss tonight, and then just you said not discuss, just send. So
Yeah, so I was clarifying to discuss the possibility of sending it to CMP, and I think that's what Anthony clarified, that was the thought. So I have
Jessica.
Sorry, I have a second follow-up on that. So when you said that, you said to the selection of educational material. Now, I think you used another word, whether it's increase the rigor, or what was the other piece of that? Because I want to make sure if I agree to send it to CMP, that I'm not agreeing to send it with a certain message, right? Like I would want to make sure I was sending to CMP for the team to talk it through, pros and cons.
Right. So this motion is just to get it on the agenda.
So the motion that I
that goes
understood was for discussion, to send to curriculum policy to discuss amendments to
Would add
increase
greater restrictions to selection of
around sexual
educational
explicit
materials.
material.
But that's what the motion would be, if I'm allowed. That's what the motion would.
And I would remind everyone to please allow the chair to recognize you before you begin speaking, as a matter of courtesy, of course. You may.
Thank you.
Please.
So, once a motion is made, if you didn't like that part, you could make a motion to amend the motion and just strike that, for instance. But what I'm doing now is just trying to get something on the agenda for us to discuss under new business.
Other discussion on this? And the motion that's been offered and seconded is to add an agenda item to discuss sending for additional consideration to curriculum policy IJJ with amendments around sexually explicit.
Restricting.
Restricting sexually
To
explicit.
add greater restrictions.
Greater restrictions around sexually explicit materials. Additional discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? 4 in favor, those opposed? So not that your vote doesn't count, Sydney, but your vote doesn't really count.
No.
So that's 4. How's my counting? 4 and 4.
No, it's 5, I think.
Was it 5? I didn't. Who was counting other than me?
I didn't.
Somebody, please.
There was a
1 abstention. So we have 4 and 4 and 1 abstention. My suggestion on this one, since obviously with 4 folks voting in the affirmative on this, there seems to be interest in taking this up. Typically, subcommittees do have some control over what they take up in their work, so unless there is significant objection, it seems that discussion of policy IJJ would be in order for that committee. Jamie?
I think the only, and I wasn't sure how Robert's rules worked in this, but I think my motion or what I want to clarify is that if we take this up in subcommittee, I want to be able to do it justice. And I think it's important to know that, when we look at a policy, we look at the whole policy. So I don't want to just look at this policy under the guise of greater restrictions for sexually explicit material. I want to be looking at the whole policy. And if we're going to make amendments, we're going to look at every part of it.
Yep. And since the motion ended up deadlocked, basically at 4 and 4, my suggestion is, as I said, subcommittees have some degree of autonomy in figuring out what they consider. And my understanding is that any discussion at the subcommittee level, be it PTB or finance or curriculum policy, would include all aspects. So,
Point of order?
Certainly. Mr. Shostak?
I'd like the weighted vote count for that, please.
No. I mean, when we talk about, you had offered up the idea that either a simple majority would do. I had indicated that a 2/3 majority would be in order. Neither one of those scenarios suggest a weighted vote.
I rise to object from the decision of the chair. That is in violation of Robert's Rules of Order. If you check, you will see that for there to be a 2/3 majority required, the board must vote. There has to be a motion to accept the agenda, and there has to be a second, and there has to be a majority vote. Barring that, it's simply a majority vote to add something to the agenda under adjustments.
I disagree. We have a standing agenda. that's distributed before the meeting. This board has never utilized the process of voting for an agenda.
I'd like the minutes to show that that is under that is objected to. I believe that the motion should pass if the votes are weighted properly.
And I disagree. Jessica?
So I have a question. So where I voted to not send that particularly worded motion forward, am I able to make a second motion to vote on now, or should I have made an adjustment at that time? Like, is it too late, and would that muddy the waters?
You could certainly offer up another motion. I mean, we're still in that adjustment to agenda component of our agenda, if you wish.
Okay, so I am fine with sending something to curriculum and policy to talk about and review. The reason I voted against that is because of the wording that seemed to indicate a particular way that they were to look at it.
Are you making a motion?
Yes, I'm trying.
So are you? So 2 points of clarification. Are you making a motion for the board to discuss sending that to a curriculum policy as the earlier motion did, or are you making a motion to send that to curriculum policy?
So I'd like to make a motion to discuss sending Mr. Shostak's concern about, is it IJJ to CMP, but I would make it open-ended where it's not any decision of the board right now in which way to look at it. So just, it would be a policy review.
As an adjustment to the agenda so the board could discuss further this evening. Is that
Whatever
correct?
we just did.
I second
So
that
yes,
motion.
that was the,
So can I clarify? So the motion, that you'd like to move that the curriculum policy committee do a review of policy IJJ?
no, I think, no, the original motion, and based on what Jessica just said, is the desire is to adjust the agenda to add an agenda item, and we could call it 9.7 or 9.9 or something like that, to discuss sending IJJ to curriculum policy for additional discussion. Is that accurate? Jamie, you seconded that discussion on this motion.
I need clarification. I really do.
On what the motion is, or on?
What's the difference between the two motions?
The first motion had a pretty specific component about what exactly the committee would be discussing around amendments.
Okay. But
And
the review
Jessica's
of,
doesn't contain that stipulation.
I guess what I don't understand is you're saying it's going to become an agenda item tonight?
Yep, that's what the original motion was, and that's what
For
just.
what reason?
To discuss sending it to curriculum policy.
So we're not doing that right now, we're
No,
just
we
putting
would-
it on the agenda?
No, we would discuss it later on in our agenda tonight.
Okay.
Whether the board is
I
interested
see.
in sending that
Okay,
policy
that's
for
what-
Amy.
further review.
I need that too.
You need that. All right.
Other discussion or clarification on this one? If not, all those in favor of sending IJJ, see, now you've confused me too, of adding an agenda item to consider sending IJJ to curriculum policy. Those opposed? Is unanimous, and we'll call that 9 point, I don't know, 9 point, whatever is after 9.8.
0.5.
9.8.5.
9.8.5.
Sure. Excellent. Any other adjustments to the agenda? If not, moving on to committee reports. We'll start with 7.1, Finance. Crystal.
Our next meeting is April 13th at the high school.
Thank you. PTB. Joe.
Very similarly, but a little bit earlier, we're meeting on April 6th. It feels like we haven't met in a long time, though, with how many school board meetings we've had since then. But yes, next PTB is April 6th.
Thank you. 7.3, curriculum policy.
Same thing. Next meeting will be April 6th, 5 PM, Green Central School.
Thank you. 7.4, Tri-Town Education Association Teachers Negotiations, TTEA. Jessica.
So we had our final preparatory meeting on Tuesday, and this coming Tuesday we meet with the full Teachers Association.
We'll look forward to updates on that. Student Representatives Report. Sydney.
I do not have anything to report this week.
Not an exciting week. And I will share that Mr. Shaw indicated that Mela has taken on some additional work responsibilities, so will not be joining us for these meetings. We appreciate her participation and her perspective that she shared throughout this process. Administrator reports, none of those tonight. Assistant Superintendent's report. Teresa.
Yes. So I have one thing that I wanted to share. Yesterday, I had the good fortune to observe a Wonder Wednesday lesson at Leeds Central School. We were in Mrs. Killinan's classroom. Our two gifted and talented teachers, Carla Lobley and Kara Getty, taught the first and second graders about the scientific method. Students observed pennies, made a hypothesis about which cleaning solution would work best to clean their pennies, and then drew conclusions after the pennies had processed in the cleaning solutions. Ketchup, soap, water, vinegar, or salt and vinegar were the cleaning solutions that were used. And it was really exciting. The kids were super excited. More than one said, "This is so fun. I'm having fun." So it was really enjoyable for me to witness.
Right.
Right, so we're dying to know which.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly what I asked.
Like, so what, was it ketchup? Tell me it was ketchup, right?
Ketchup's come worse than vinegar and salt, but second was ketchup because it contains vinegar and salt.
And it's delicious.
And the kids were going to go home and try many other items to see if their pennies would clean with honey, peanut butter, hair shampoo. Yes, thanks. Good times.
So apologies to all those families.
Definitely. Thank you. That brings us to the superintendent's report.
Yeah, so we've been meeting so often. All I have to offer tonight is Teresa and I both have a conflict for the May 18th board meeting, so we will be working with you all to postpone it by a week. It's in May. It's in a while.
It's in a while.
No. Well, it is the same day as the referendum, but it's just a regular board meeting, and there's nothing that the board has to do because of the referendum.
Okay.
So, I'll communicate in email, but I just wanted to say that out loud, that meeting will be postponed.
Thank you. Old business, we don't have any of that, so that brings us to new business. 9.1, second reading and adoption of Curriculum and Policy Committee recommended revised policy IHBEA, programs for students with limited English proficiency. We have a motion on that one.
So moved.
Crystal, do we have a second?
Second.
Discussion on this one. Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 9.2, and that is first reading and acceptance of Curriculum and Policy Committee recommended revised policy JFAA, admission of resident students in MSAD 52. We have a motion on that one.
So moved.
Crystal, we have a second. Kyle. Discussion on this one. Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 9.3, first reading and acceptance of Curriculum and Policy recommended revised policy IIB, pre-K to 6, class size and composition. We have a motion on this one. Brooke? Second? Anthony? Discussion on this one. There's a whole bunch. I'm gonna...
Usually all by myself.
Joe?
No, I like the direction that the class size has moved. I'm just curious, is that a reflection of what we've actually been doing, or is this a goal that we're setting for ourselves? Why is this changing?
Same question.
So in pre-K, it's actually a law that for every 8 students, there needs to be 1 staff person. So that is why that was changed. The other ones were changed to reflect state guidelines and what we've had for actual sizes in classes.
So you say we do align with this pretty well right now?
We do. I think the important piece to remember is that these are guidelines, and if there's 21 students in a classroom, you wouldn't necessarily add an additional teacher. You have to look at the whole picture. I know when I was a principal, there would be times when classes might get up to 21 or 22, but if you didn't have a space to put another room, you wouldn't add another classroom. You might do something different to support the students in the class.
Okay.
Adding an extra, like hiring an ed tech instead of an additional teacher, something like that.
Thank you.
Carl, did I understand from you and Jessica that was?
Same question.
Same
yeah.
question. Okay. Other discussion on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 9.4, first reading and acceptance of curriculum and policy committee recommended revised policy IKB, policy on homework and deletion of regulation IKBR, policy regulations on homework. Do you have a motion on this one? Crystal, do you have a second? Jamie? Roll call. Discussion on this one. Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. 9.5, first reading and acceptance of curriculum and policy committee recommended revised policy JFAB, admission of non-resident students to MSAD 52. Do we have a motion on this one? Crystal? Second, Anthony? Discussion on this one.
This is just conforming with state law?
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, and, you know, we talked about it in committee. There were several questions that got brought up, like the tuition fee, that it's allowable by law, but our district does not do that. So it really doesn't affect that at all. But everything else is just in accordance with Maine state law.
Other discussion on this one? Seeing none, all those in favor? Unanimous. So that brings us to item 9.6. The agenda item indicates board deliberation on citizen proposed policies, and there is no recommendation from the Curriculum and Policy Committee. Since our process indicates that we need to have a motion in order for there to be discussion on something, I would entertain a motion on these policies. Jessica? Your motion is in support, and just a reminder, like, motions always have to be in the positive. You can't have it.
Yeah, in support of the discussion.
I'll second.
In discussion of, in support of discussion or in support of the policy?
Oh, it was in support that we were going to be doing the deliberation.
So, yeah, and so we're going to be considering taking some sort of action, so the motion ought to be what action you wish the board to take.
So well, then that's a personal opinion, so I would say that my motion is in not support of enacting the citizen policies.
Yep, and that's exactly why. So
Okay.
our motions have to be in the positive, not in the negative. So do we have a motion to take action on these policies? Anthony?
I move that we accept these policies.
Do we have a second? Do we have a second? If there's no second, the motion dies. So there's no second, so there is no action recommended on that. That brings us to 9.8, and that is approval of January expenditure and operating reports. Do we have a motion on this one?
So moved.
Crystal? Do we have a second on this one?
Second.
Jessica? Discussion? Discussion on this one? Seeing none? All those in favor? Unanimous. 9.8.5, and this is, so I think for this one, same sort of idea, discussion, but would need a motion to direct consideration of IJJ by curriculum policy. Anthony?
I move that the Curriculum and Policy Committee take up IJJ for the purpose of adding greater restrictions for sexually explicit content.
Do we have a second on that? Kyle? Discussion? Anthony?
So I think it's very clear, or should be clear, that there are many members of the community who are highly concerned about the ability to acquire objects for our collections in the libraries or classroom that that are sexually explicit in the most explicit ways. And this motion would allow the Curriculum and Policy Committee to look at ways that we could tighten things such that we might not have, as one of our public speakers mentioned tonight, that we might be able to avoid future legal actions, challenges, things like that. I believe that the current wording of that policy would make it possible for someone to make a very convincing argument to keep Playboy magazine in the collection if it already existed there. The pictures that you would typically find there are less explicit than are already in some of the other materials. The writing is award-winning journalism, award-winning fiction. Fahrenheit 451 was serialized in that publication. It gets awards, it would be able to tick off all of the boxes, and yet it's clear that that does not belong in our libraries. And so I think that it's necessary for this board to direct the Curriculum and Policy Committee to recommend some greater restrictions that would allow our staff to, with confidence, acquire materials that this board would support and that the community would support.
Jessica?
So I think there's enough interest from the board and from the community to send something back to CNP. I would just like to make an amendment in that we're not giving them direction of what we want them to do with the policy, and that instead we're asking them to relook at the policy.
So we need to deal with the amendment first. Is there a second to the amendment?
I'll second.
Joe? So we'll discuss the amendment. So Jessica, if I understand your amendment, you're amending to remove the stipulation that it be around sexually explicit materials. Is that accurate, or would you like to state it differently?
No, that's fine.
Discussion around the amendment.
I think, I think that the amendment is fair, especially considering the fact that Mr. Shostak is on the committee. So he's going to be allowed to bring up and discuss that issue with IJJ. So I don't see any reason why we would object to that.
Tammy?
And just to clarify, IJJ, and I don't have my policy book in front of me, has to do with the selection of materials for our school.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Further discussion on the amendment, Joe?
Yeah, I think the amendment is appropriate because it removes any supposition of conclusion of the discussion of IJJ. They very, very well come back with that type of conclusion, but I would rather not direct that conclusion at the start.
Additional discussion on the amendment. Anthony?
I just think that removing that purpose sends a message to the community that dilutes the message that is sent by saying that we're going to address this. So I think that's unfortunate, but.
Jessica?
I very much disagree. I think the message is sent that we heard the community and we heard what you brought forward, and that it is not our job individually to tell each curriculum policy or PTB what we want. We want to give them the leeway to talk about it and do some research, and that's not something that we can decide right now, in my personal opinion.
Additional discussion on the amendment. Kyle?
I like where you're going with it, but I also feel like we are looking at the policy, like Jimmy's saying, is just that at least it gives us the broad stroke to look at that other part of IJJ, just to make sure that we can actually, you guys can collaborate more on some other things too, because it might be something else in that. I'm not familiar enough with the policy itself, but it'd be nice to be able to go through it in a little bit more detail too.
Additional discussion on the amendment. Seeing none?
I'm sorry.
You're so close.
I know, I'm sorry. I think that I just want the rest of the board to know that something like this is going to be a large undertaking. And we're going to, it's going to be, so you shouldn't be expecting further policies from us to be reviewed if we're going to undertake a task such as this. And so I just want, before you guys vote, I just want you to know that probably IJJ, if we're going to be reviewing this in its entirety, and in our policy on policy making, we have to talk to those that are affected most by the policy. So we'll probably bring in the librarians and everyone else. So I think it could be a large undertaking.
Additional discussion on, I'm going to go with Crystal.
My question was, IJJ, this is proposed by MSMA, right? It's not we developed it in 1985 and we've just kind of reviewed it. This is something that is
When was the last time it was updated?
When was the last time it was updated?
It's been a little while.
So this is specifically selection of educational materials. And it looks like it was March of 2018. Right now, the policy committee has been working to revise policies that have not been reviewed since 2014, just to give you an idea of the, I think we might be finishing up, Jamie, the 2014s?
We are. Yep. We're on kind of the last of them and then going to 2015.
Well, did Jessica want to?
So, and actually Robert's rules indicates that members should be called on like twice on each, a maximum of 2 times.
Am I over my maximum?
I was keeping score.
Can I write it down and ask Priscilla?
Slide notes. Slide notes.
I've got one left.
And then, Tammy, did you have a question?
I have many. No, I have to say that I agree with you. It is going to be a process, and I want people to understand that we're listening, and I also share the burden of what we're putting before our children. But it is a process, and we have to bring in and listen to all the stakeholders. And from that point, come to a place where we find the common ground. So in that, I just want to express that it will take time, and it may not actually get addressed and completed. You know, there are lots of things to remember when you're making policy, and I'm just going to read something. Policy making is necessarily a slow and deliberate process. You don't ram policies through. You grow and you nurture them, just like our children. So when we approach this, because it is a very delicate and controversial issue, I think we just have to keep that in mind. Thank you.
Further discussion? Crystal?
Is there a time frame that it needs to be addressed in curriculum and policy? Like 2 meetings from now, 5 meetings from now, or that's up to you guys?
There was not a time frame specified in the motion, so.
Okay.
I was actually just going to support, Tammy said it much more eloquently than me, but I wanted to be clear that this is not like, and I understand that I get requests from community members, people want things, and I think it's just important to remember that things can't happen in 2 weeks, 1 week. You know, things have to happen over a period of time to make sure it's done deliberately. So I just wanted, I think, supporting the curriculum committee in that work, that it's timely, but Tammy was much more eloquent than I was, so I should have just left it at her.
I was just curious if we've moved on from the discussion about the amendment, which I think we were in. Don't we have to?
We have to take up the amendment. Okay. Dispose of, shall we, the amendment. So we're still talking about the amendment. Anything else on the amendment specifically? If not, all those in favor of the amendment, and the amendment is to remove the stipulations around sexually explicit. Those opposed? One opposed? So the amendment passes. The amended motion is to send IJJ to curriculum policy for consideration. Is there additional discussion that folks are interested in on that? If not, all those in favor of the amended motion? Those opposed? Unanimous? And again, there was not a specific time frame stipulated on that. I'm certain this subcommittee has almost enough work to do to keep it busy. There are no, with the removal of 9.7 and 9.9, there are no other items of business on our agenda. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Anthony, Crystal, Anthony. All those in favor? That one appears